You think the funeral home is selling you a service. Sit with the number. The average American funeral runs about $8,300, and the single most profitable thing in the building isn't the service at all. It's the box. A century ago, none of this existed. Your family washed the body, built the box, and dug the hole. And it cost almost nothing. So, how did the saddest week of your life turn into an $8,000 transaction, and who decided it should? That's what we're following today. Not death. The invoice death now comes with. Because here's the thing about this particular market. It never has a bad quarter. It never runs out of customers. Demand is not just steady. It is over a long enough window, exactly 100%. Every person who has ever lived is a future line item. And for almost all of human history, that guaranteed demand generated almost no business at all. Death was handled the way birth was handled. At home, by family, for free. Someone you loved died in the front room, and the same hands that had fed them, washed them, dressed them, and sat with them until the ground was ready. There was grief. There was ritual. There was no receipt. Today, that same week comes with a price list. And the story of how we got from the front room to the price list is not really a story about death at all. It's a story about how you take something everyone must do, something nobody wants to think about, and something that happens at the worst possible moment to negotiate, and you turn it into a product. 3 things are going to happen in this video. You're going to watch an invisible family duty get turned into a commodity. You're going to watch a single profession quietly take control of the whole thing. And right in the middle, you're going to find out where the money actually is, because it is almost never where you think it is. Keep that in mind. You think you're paying for a service. Hold that thought. Start with the problem any business in this space has to solve. Death as a product is terrible. It's unpredictable, it's local, and worst of all, the customer already knows how to do it themselves. For thousands of years, a dead body was not a business opportunity, because caring for it was simply a thing families knew how to do, the way they knew how to bake bread or salt meat. To build an industry, you first have to take that knowledge out of the home. You have to make people believe that this is a job for a specialist, that there is something about the dead body that ordinary hands can no longer be trusted to handle. The wedge that did this was a chemical one. It was embalming, the practice of replacing the blood with preservative, so a body could be kept and displayed for days rather than hours. And to understand why Americans accepted it, you have to go to the moment the country was drowning in its own dead. The Civil War killed on a scale the country had no system for. Hundreds of thousands of young men died far from home, and their families faced a horror that was also, brutally, a logistics problem. A body decomposing in a field in Virginia could not be sent home to a mother in Ohio. Into that gap stepped men with a chemical solution and a price list. The most famous of them, a surgeon named Thomas Holmes, is often called the father of American embalming. By his own account, he embalmed more than 4,000 soldiers during the war, charging $50 for an officer and $25 for an enlisted man. Figures that climbed as the war dragged on and the dead piled up. Now, here's where honesty matters more than a clean number. Holmes was not only an embalmer, he was a relentless self-promoter, and that figure of 4,000 is almost certainly inflated. Historians treat it as advertising, not accounting. But you don't actually need the exact count to see the thing that changed. What changed is that a price appeared. For the first time at industrial scale, caring for the dead had a rate card. A soldier's preserved body arriving home was 2 things at once: a grief ended and a receipt proof that death could be handed to a professional and billed. And then the professional got the greatest advertisement in the country's history, and he didn't even have to pay for it. In the spring of 1865, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and his embalmed body was placed on a train that traveled roughly 1,650 miles through some 180 cities across 7 states, so the nation could see him. By the most cited estimates, around 1.5 million people filed past the open casket, and something like 7 million watched the procession pass. They came to mourn a president. Along the way, without anyone framing it this way, they also witnessed the longest-running product demonstration in American history. A body, weeks after death, still recognizable enough to look upon. Embalming worked. Everyone saw it work. It's tempting to say Lincoln's funeral created the American funeral industry, and you'll hear that said. It's too neat. The honest version is quieter and more interesting. The war and the funeral didn't invent the business. They normalized it. They took a strange, slightly grisly chemical procedure and made it familiar, even patriotic, even loving. And once a family believes that keeping the body looking peaceful for the viewing is part of a good death, once that belief is in place, someone has to be paid to do it. The wedge is in. The door to the home has been opened from the outside, and a professional is standing in it. So follow that professional inside, because this is where the money starts to move, and where you can actually watch a single week get built into a bill. Once embalming put a specialist in the room, that specialist did not stop at embalming. He became the undertaker later, the more dignified funeral director, and his real innovation was not chemical, it was organizational. He noticed that a grieving family now needed a dozen different things in a hurry, and that each of those things could be bought and sold, and that he could be the one who sold all of them at once. Consider what a death now required. The body needed preserving, that's the embalming. It needed somewhere to be displayed. A room with chairs and soft light and a register book. That's the funeral home, a building that exists to rent grief a space. It needed transport, and not an ordinary transport, a specialized vehicle, the hearse, that carries only the dead. It needed a container, and here we arrive at the center of everything, the casket. It needed a place in the ground, the plot, sold by the cemetery. It needed something to mark that ground, the headstone, and around all of it swarmed the add-ons. The flowers, the printed cards, the obituary notice, the guest book, the vault that lines the grave. Look at what just happened. A single unavoidable event has been unbundled into 8, 10, 12 separate purchases, and then rebundled and handed to a family as a package at the one moment in life when almost nobody has the will to itemize, to compare, or to say no. This is the quiet genius of the arrangement. Picture yourself in that chair. Someone you love died 2 days ago. You have not slept. You have no experience buying any of this, and no time to shop, and you are sitting across a desk from a calm, kind professional who does this every single day and slides a price list toward you. In that chair, almost nobody negotiates. Almost nobody walks out. That is not a failure of the customer. It is the most reliable sales environment ever built, and it was assembled one grieving family at a time. And multiply that single chair by every death in the country, and the shape of the whole thing comes into view. Estimates of the American death care market run to somewhere around $68 billion a year, though the honest figure depends entirely on where you draw the edges. Count only the funeral homes themselves, and it sits closer to $22 billion. Fold in the cemeteries, the headstones, the flowers, the vaults, and the swelling business of memorials, and it climbs toward that larger number. The exact total is less important than the fact underneath it. Dying is one of the largest guaranteed markets in the country, and almost none of it existed within living memory of the Civil War. And now watch the numbers, because they aren't spread evenly across that package. This is the part the industry would rather you not sit with. Back in 1963, a journalist named Jessica Mitford published a book called The American Way of Death, and she did something nobody had bothered to do. She looked at the wholesale prices. What she found was that the casket, the emotional center of the whole ceremony, the object the family stands over and weeps against, was routinely marked up by a factor of 10 or more over what it cost the funeral home to buy. The box that looked like the Sacred Heart of the ritual was, on the ledger, the profit engine. Her book sold something like 750,000 copies in its first year, and it did not sell because Americans love spreadsheets. It sold because it named a discomfort everybody had felt in that chair and nobody had been able to prove. So let's name the thing directly, because we're now at the center of this. You think you're paying for a service. You're paying for a box. And this is the flip. This is where the whole business turns over and shows you its underside. The service, the caring, the embalming, the dignified man in the dark suit, the quiet room, the handling of the body, all of that is real, and it has real value. And it is also on the balance sheet, closer to a loss leader than a profit center. The margin was never in the labor. The margin is in the merchandise. And walk into the room where the caskets are shown, and you'll find the psychology built right into the furniture. The most expensive models tend to sit at eye level, in the best light, in the richest finishes. The cheapest is often tucked low, or off to one side, in a color nobody would choose, sometimes given a name that makes it faintly shameful to pick, so that choosing it feels like a small public confession that you wouldn't spend on the person you lost. That is not an accident of decorating. That is the margin, arranged as a room. It's in the casket at 10 times cost. It's in the outer burial vault the cemetery requires. It's in the plot of land sold by the square foot, and the granite marker, and the upgraded lining, and the premium hardware on the lid. The funeral director is not, financially speaking, selling you the skilled and genuine service of caring for your dead. He is using that service, and the trust and paralysis that come with it, to sell you objects. The ceremony is the cover charge. The merchandise is the game. And once you see that, the strange shape of the whole industry suddenly makes sense. It explains why, when you ask for a simple price, you're so often walked instead to a room full of caskets. It explains why the cheapest option is real, but almost never shown first. It explains why, for decades, the single most expensive item in the room was the one wrapped most tightly in love and guilt. None of this requires anyone in that building to be a villain, and most of them are not. It only requires a structure in which the profit lives in the objects, and the objects are sold to people who cannot, in that moment, bear to choose the cheap one for someone they loved. The system doesn't need bad people. It just needs that chair, and that grief, and that price list. But a machine this profitable, built on a moment this vulnerable, was never going to run forever without someone noticing. So what threatens it? What has been pushing back against the package? The first threat came from the government, and it came late. It was not until 1984, more than a century after the undertaker first stepped into the parlor, and 2 decades after Mitford's book, that the Federal Trade Commission finally passed what's simply called the Funeral Rule. Read what it actually requires, and you'll understand exactly what had been happening for 100 years. The rule forces funeral homes to give you an itemized price list you can keep. It forces them to show you a casket price list before they walk you into the room of caskets. And it forbids them from requiring you to buy the package as a bundle. You now have the legal right to buy only the pieces you want. Sit with that. The law had to step in and force these businesses to tell you the prices and to let you say no to the parts you didn't want. You don't write a rule like that for an industry that was being straight with people. You write it for one that wasn't. The second threat is bigger, and it's happening right now. And it's quietly dismantling the entire package from underneath. It's cremation. For most of the 20th century, the burial package embalm, display, casket, vault, plot, stone was the default. And the default was where all the margin lived. But Americans have been walking away from it at a speed that should terrify anyone in the business. In 2023, the cremation rate crossed 60%. By 2025, it was above 63%. And the industry's own association projects it will pass 80% by 2045. Every one of those choices is a family opting out of the casket, out of the vault, out of the plot, Out of the stone, out of exactly the high-margin objects the whole model was built to sell. Cremation is not just a different preference. It is the customer quietly refusing the cover charge. And cremation is only the leading edge. Behind it comes a wave of families choosing direct cremation with no service at all, natural or green burials that skip the embalming and the vault entirely, and online casket sellers that ship you the box for a fraction of the funeral home's price. Right. The funeral rule quietly guarantees, because a home cannot legally refuse to use a casket you bought somewhere else. Every one of those choices is another high-margin line item slipping out of the package and never coming back. So how does an industry survive its own customers, walking away from its most profitable product? It does what struggling industries always do. It consolidates. And this is the part almost nobody sees. That funeral home in your town, the one with a family's name on the sign, the one that's supposedly been there for generations, there is a real chance that family sold it years ago, and the name is now just paint. The largest death care company in North America, Service Corporation International, operates well over 1,000 funeral homes and hundreds of cemeteries across dozens of states, controlling something like a sixth of the entire market. And it very often keeps the original local name on the door. The warm, small, personal business handling the most intimate moment of your life may quietly answer to a publicly traded company and its shareholders. The winner is scale. A national company can buy caskets by the tens of thousands, share a fleet of hearses across a whole region, run embalming through central facilities, and keep the reassuring old name on each individual building, while the profits flow upward to one balance sheet. Grief, it turns out, is a wonderfully predictable revenue stream, once you own enough of it. The casualty is the thing on the sign. The genuinely independent, family-owned funeral home, the kind the whole nostalgic image of the trade is built on, has been thinning out for years. The country counted more than 19,000 funeral homes in 2017. Just 4 years later, it had slipped under 19,000 and was still falling. Has independents folded or sold their names into the larger chains? What you're often left with is the feeling of the corner undertaker wrapped around the economics of a corporation. But the real casualty was never the small operator. It's the person in the chair. It's the family that, at the lowest moment of their lives, was handed a package built to extract the maximum from their unwillingness to seem cheap about someone they loved. That's who Mitford was writing for. That's who the funeral rule was, belatedly, trying to protect. And that's who the rise of cremation, in its blunt and unsentimental way, is finally giving an exit. So let's hold both of these truths at once, because the easy version of this story is a lie in either direction. The grief is real, the ritual is real, and it matters the gathering, the looking, the marking of a life, the human need to do something with our hands when someone is gone. None of that is a scam. And anyone who tells you a funeral is nothing but a ripoff is mocking something sacred to make themselves feel clever. But the machine that grew up around that grief is a machine. It took a free duty of the family and turned it into a professional service. It took a professional service and used it to sell objects at 10 times their cost. It bundled the objects into a package and presented that package at the one moment human beings are least able to refuse. And it kept the family name on the door long after the family was gone. You think you're paying for a service. Now you know you're mostly paying for a box, and you know how the box got there. The next time you sit in that chair, and someday most of us will, you'll still feel the grief. That part never had a price. But you'll also see the machine behind the man in the dark suit, and you'll know that every line on that list is a choice, and that saying no to the expensive box is not the same as loving someone less. Because that's the quiet lever this whole industry was built on. The fear that grief has to be proven with money. It doesn't. And once enough people understand that, the package that ruled American death for a century starts to look like what it always was. Not a ritual, but a sale. Next time, we follow the money into the ground itself, into the cemetery, and the very strange business of selling people a piece of land they will never stand on.